Hello, everyone, and welcome to Gone Legends, the place where we celebrate the lives, legacies, and timeless stories of Hollywood's greatest stars and beloved icons. These are the legends who may have left this world, but whose light continues to shine through their unforgettable work. You're watching Gone Legends, where memories live forever. Before we begin, we'd love your support. Please like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us where you're watching from and which legend has touched your heart the most. Now, let's begin this heartfelt journey of remembrance.
Brian Douglas Wilson, born on June 20, 1942, in Inglewood, California, was more than a musician. He was a visionary who redefined what pop music could be. As the co-founder, songwriter, and creative genius behind the Beach Boys, Brian Wilson created harmonies that became the very sound of American youth. In the early 1960s, while rock and roll was still finding its voice, Wilson was already years ahead. With songs like Surfin' USA, California Girls, and Wouldn't It Be Nice, he painted sonic pictures of sunshine, freedom, and the endless summer dream. His music wasn't just fun, it was emotional, layered, and deeply human. But Brian's true brilliance shone brightest in his groundbreaking production work. His 1966 masterpiece, Pet Sounds, changed the course of popular music forever. Drawing inspiration from the Beatles and classical orchestration, he fused lush harmonies, complex arrangements, and heartfelt lyrics into something entirely new. It was an album that didn't just entertain, it made listeners feel. Then came Good Vibrations, one of the most ambitious singles ever created. With its unconventional structure, shifting keys, and haunting use of the theremin, it was a 3-minute journey through joy, wonder, and mystery. Paul McCartney once called it the greatest pop single ever made. Behind the music, though, Brian faced lifelong struggles with mental health, battles with depression, anxiety, and the voices that haunted his mind. Yet through all of it, he continued to create. His resilience and honesty made him not just a musical genius, but a symbol of courage and vulnerability in the face of pain. On June 11, 2025, Brian Wilson passed away peacefully at the age of 82. The world mourned the loss of a man whose sound had defined decades. His harmonies had been the soundtrack of adolescence, love, and the California dream itself. Brian Wilson's legacy is eternal. He pushed the boundaries of pop music, transforming it into art, crafting songs that sounded like nothing before and still feel timeless today. His music captured the light, the surf, and the yearning of youth. And in every harmony, every echo of a Beach Boys song, his spirit still sings. George Wendt, the man millions knew and loved as Norm Peterson on Cheers, passed away on May 20, 2025, at the age of 76. For more than a decade, Wendt was the warm, familiar face at the end of the bar, the everyman with a one-liner always ready, and a heart that somehow made us all feel at home. His deadpan delivery, effortless timing, and laid-back humor turned Norm into one of the most iconic greetings in television history. But behind the laughter was an actor of rare depth and generosity. Off-screen, George Wendt was known for his humility and kindness, a collaborator who lifted others up, whether they were seasoned performers or newcomers finding their footing. He understood that great comedy isn't just about punchlines, it's about connection. From Cheers to his countless guest roles and stage performances, Wendt brought authenticity to every role. He had a gift for making the ordinary feel extraordinary, for finding heart in humor and humanity in every laugh. George Wendt's passing marks the end of an era, but his spirit lives on in every sitcom bar stool, in every friendly laugh shared among friends, and in every rerun that reminds us why we fell in love with Cheers in the first place. His legacy is simple, but profound. Through laughter, he brought people together. Through comedy, he created community. George Wendt may have left the bar, but Norm, and the warmth he represented, will always remain. Loni Anderson, the golden-hearted star who lit up television screens as Jennifer Marlowe on WKRP in Cincinnati, passed away on August 3, 2025, just days before her 80th birthday. With her radiant smile, sharp wit, and undeniable charm, Loni became one of television's most beloved leading ladies. As Jennifer Marlowe, she broke the mold, playing not just a beautiful face, but a confident, intelligent woman who handled every moment with grace and humor. She gave audiences a character who was strong, self-assured, and effortlessly kind, a rare combination that made her unforgettable. But beyond the lights and laughter of Hollywood, Loni Anderson was admired for something even greater, her warmth. She treated her fans with the same sincerity she brought to every role, always approachable, always genuine. In interviews and appearances, she carried herself with candor and poise, never afraid to speak her truth, yet always doing so with compassion. Her career spanned decades, from television to film, and throughout it all, Loni remained a symbol of timeless elegance and resilience. She balanced glamour with heart, proving that true beauty shines brightest when it comes from within. Loni Anderson's legacy is one of light, a blend of humor, kindness, and strength wrapped in grace. She reminded the world that strength doesn't always roar, sometimes it smiles. Loni Anderson will forever be remembered not only for the laughter she brought, but for the warmth she left behind. Priscilla Marie Pointer was born on May 18, 1924, in New York City. From the very beginning, she was drawn to the stage, to the art of storytelling and the quiet power of performance. Over the decades, she built a career defined not by flash or fame, but by dedication, skill, and grace. Her journey began in theater, where she honed her craft with depth and discipline before stepping into film and television. From the 1950s onward, Priscilla Pointer became one of those rare, steady presences in Hollywood, an actress whose face you recognized instantly, even if her name wasn't always in the spotlight. She had that remarkable ability to disappear into her roles, to make every character believable, human, and real. Audiences knew her from her memorable appearances in shows like Dallas, and in films that showcased her dramatic range and quiet intensity. Behind the scenes, she was also a guiding force, the mother of actress Amy Irving, nurturing creativity and artistry in her family, just as she did in her work. On April 28, 2025, Priscilla Pointer passed away from natural causes in Ridgefield, Connecticut, at the age of 100. Her passing marked the end of a remarkable century, one spent devoted to the craft of acting, to the art of storytelling, and to the enduring spirit of performance. Priscilla Pointer's legacy lives on, not only through the roles she played, but through the generations of artists she inspired. She was one of those quiet pillars of the industry, versatile, committed, and deeply woven into the tapestry of Hollywood's golden tradition of character actors. Ruth Buzzi, born July 24, 1936, was one of television's great treasures. A master of timing, expression, and heart. She rose to fame as the unforgettable Gladys Ormsby on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, the feisty, bonnet-wearing spinster whose quick wit and swinging purse made America laugh week after week. But behind the comedy was brilliance. Ruth didn't just tell jokes, she embodied characters. With a grin, a puff, and that perfectly timed glare, she created moments that lived far beyond the screen. Her humor was universal, funny to children, sharp enough for adults, and always full of heart. Over the decades, Ruth's talent stretched far beyond Laugh-In. She became a familiar face in film, television, and voice acting, a performer who could light up a room just by being in it. Her kindness, warmth, and generosity were every bit as legendary as her comedy. In her later years, Ruth faced Alzheimer's disease, a difficult chapter that she met with the same quiet grace that marked her entire life. She passed away on May 1, 2025, in Texas, at the age of 88, surrounded by love, having been under hospice care. Ruth Buzzi's legacy is simple, yet profound. She reminded us that laughter isn't just entertainment, it's medicine. It's connection. It's a healing art form that brings light even in the darkest times. Through every purse swing, every perfectly timed line, Ruth Buzzi gave us comfort, joy, and something even rarer, genuine warmth. And that's why, long after the laughter fades, her spirit will remain, smiling, gentle, and forever ready with one more laugh for the world. Sam Moore, born October 12, 1935, was a voice that could move mountains. As one half of the legendary duo Sam and Dave, he helped define the very sound of soul music. He passed away on January 10, 2025, at the age of 89, leaving behind a legacy as one of the greatest vocalists to ever grace the stage. With songs like Soul Man and Hold On, I'm Coming, Sam Moore didn't just sing, he testified. His voice carried the power of the church, the pain of struggle, and the unshakable joy of survival. Every note he sang was alive, raw, electrifying, and deeply human. Together with Dave Prater, Sam brought gospel fire to rhythm and blues, creating a sound that would inspire generations of artists, from Bruce Springsteen and the Blues Brothers, to countless singers who learned that soul isn't just a style, it's a truth. Sam Moore's music reflected the Black American experience in all its dimensions: joy and sorrow, faith and fight, heartbreak and hope. He turned pain into melody and triumph into harmony. Even after the duo's heyday, Sam continued to perform with the same spirit that made him a legend, a man whose voice could lift people up, unite crowds, and make strangers feel like family. Sam Moore's legacy is simple but eternal. That a single, honest voice, filled with passion and purpose, can inspire souls, carry messages, and bridge divides. His sound will forever echo through time, reminding us what it truly means to be a soul man. Sly Stone, born Sylvester Stewart in 1943, was more than just a musician. He was a revolution in motion. With his band, Sly and the Family Stone, he reshaped the sound of America, blending funk, soul, rock, and psychedelic energy into something the world had never heard before. From the late 1960s through the 1970s, Sly's music carried a message that transcended race, class, and genre. Songs like Everyday People, Stand, and Family Affair weren't just chart-topping hits, they were anthems of hope and unity in an era torn by division. Behind the rhythm and the groove was a deeper truth, that music could be a force for equality. The Family Stone itself was a living example of that vision, an interracial, mixed-gender band at a time when such a thing was almost unheard of. Sly's sound was bold. His lyrics were fearless. And his influence rippled through generations, shaping the artistry of legends like Prince, Stevie Wonder, and countless others who followed. But Sly Stone's story was also one of struggle, with fame, with freedom, and with the price of genius. Yet through it all, his music remained timeless, a celebration of life, love, and the unbreakable human spirit. Sly Stone passed away on June 9, 2025, at the age of 82. But his groove, that unmistakable spark that made people dance and think at the same time, will never fade. Sly Stone didn't just make music. He made history, and reminded us all that we are, indeed, everyday people. There are stories, and then there are lives that feel larger than life itself. Lives that carry the power of art, rebellion, heartbreak, and transformation, all woven together into one breathtaking journey. And when we talk about such a life, one name rises again and again, glowing like a timeless flame across generations. That name is Jane Seymour Fonda. An actress, an activist, a survivor, a woman who has lived more than one lifetime within her own. Born into fame, scarred by tragedy, loved and hated in equal measure, she has stood on every kind of stage, from Hollywood sets to protest lines, from fitness studios to the halls of power. Through 6 decades of triumph and turmoil, Jane Fonda has been a mirror, reflecting not just the changes in her own soul, but the shifting spirit of America itself. To tell her story is to journey through the heart of a woman who dared to redefine what it means to be strong, what it means to fall, and what it means to rise again. Soft pause. Music grows more dramatic. Jane Fonda is not just a name in film credits. She is a chapter in cultural history, a voice of defiance, a symbol of reinvention, and a living reminder that courage often grows from pain. From the bright lights of movie premieres to the dark corners of personal loss. From red carpets to protest marches. From scandal to salvation. Hers is the story of a woman who refused to be defined by others, who stumbled, who learned, who fought, who evolved. And though she's been celebrated and criticized, admired and attacked, one truth remains: she never stopped being real. So tonight, we look back at the life of Jane Fonda, a woman of fire, grace, and courage. To understand the woman Jane Fonda became, you have to begin long before the fame, before the awards, before the headlines. You have to go back to a little girl born into both privilege and pain, a girl who would learn far too young that not all that glitters in Hollywood is gold. Jane Seymour Fonda was born on December 21, 1937, in New York City, into one of the most respected acting families in America. Her father, Henry Fonda, was already a celebrated film star, the embodiment of decency and strength on screen. Her mother, Frances Ford Seymour, was a beautiful socialite of Canadian descent, known for her elegance and grace. From the outside, the Fondas looked perfect, a picture of old Hollywood glamour and stability. But behind the mansion doors, there was tension, distance, and heartbreak. Henry Fonda was a man devoted to his craft, but not always to his home. His calm and moral characters on screen masked a deep emotional reserve in real life. He was often cold, detached, and demanding. Jane would later recall that she spent her childhood trying to win his love, to be seen, to be enough. Her mother, Frances, was the opposite, emotional, passionate, but fragile. She struggled with mental health issues throughout her life, trapped by the expectations of high society and the loneliness of her marriage. When Jane was just 12 years old, tragedy struck. In 1950, her mother was admitted to a psychiatric hospital in New York. A few months later, Jane was told that her mother had died of a heart attack. But that wasn't true. Only years later would Jane discover the devastating truth: her mother had taken her own life. She had slit her throat with a razor in the asylum. Jane found out the truth not from her father, not from family, but from reading a magazine. She was a teenager, and her world shattered. Music dips into a deep, emotional cello note, slow and heavy. That single moment became one of the defining emotional scars of Jane Fonda's life. The pain of her mother's death, and her father's inability to comfort her, would echo through every chapter that followed. For years, Jane carried guilt she couldn't name. She blamed herself. Maybe she hadn't been a good enough daughter. Maybe she hadn't seen the signs. That guilt would follow her into adulthood, shaping her relationships, her work, and her activism. After Frances's death, Henry Fonda became even more emotionally distant. The household was disciplined, but cold. Love was not spoken aloud. Affection was replaced with expectation. Jane adored her father, but she also feared him. She would later say, "If I could just make him proud, if I could just make him smile, that would be enough." Her need for approval became the fuel for her drive, and the quiet ache beneath her ambition. She attended elite schools, Emma Willard School and Vassar College, where she developed confidence, wit, and a sharp intellect. Yet, even as she smiled, something inside her remained unsettled. The stage was where she found herself, and found escape. Watching her father on screen gave her a strange kind of comfort. Acting, she realized, was a way to understand emotion, to control it, to express what was locked inside. She studied acting under the legendary Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio in New York. Strasberg saw something in her immediately. He once told her, "You have something rare, Jane. You don't just act, you reveal." Those words stayed with her. And though she had inherited her father's bone structure and her mother's grace, she was determined not to live in their shadows. She would build her own identity, her own truth, one role at a time. In her later years, Jane Fonda would speak openly about her childhood, saying that it was filled with love unspoken, grief unhealed, and silence unbroken. But through that silence, something powerful grew: empathy. Jane learned to see pain, not just her own, but in others. It gave her acting depth. It gave her activism passion. And it gave her life meaning beyond the fame she was born into. From the ashes of tragedy, Jane Fonda began to build a woman who would not just survive, but transform. After years of shadow and silence, Jane Fonda stepped into the light, and the world began to take notice. The 1950s were over, and a new era of cinema was dawning. Hollywood was changing, bolder, freer, more expressive. And into that new world walked a young woman with her father's intensity, her mother's beauty, and her own unshakable determination. Jane Fonda was ready to begin. Her acting journey started in the theater, not the movies. Under the mentorship of Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio, Jane learned to channel her pain into performance. Strasberg's method approach, emotional honesty, psychological truth, became her foundation. She wasn't content with pretending, She wanted to feel every word, every emotion, every crack in a character's soul. Fonda's classmates included names that would soon define Hollywood: Al Pacino, Marilyn Monroe, Paul Newman. But even among them, Jane stood out. She was serious, introspective, and driven. Strasberg once said that Jane had something raw and real, a depth that couldn't be taught. Soon, casting directors began to call. Jane Fonda made her feature film debut in 1960 with Tall Story, opposite Anthony Perkins. The movie was light, romantic, and playful, a modest start. But even in her first role, Jane's charisma was undeniable. Critics took notice of her energy, her intelligence, and her presence. She wasn't just another pretty face in Hollywood. She had something electric, something different. Through the early 1960s, she appeared in several films that showcased her versatility, from comedies like Cat Ballou, 1965, to romantic dramas such as Barefoot in the Park, 1967, alongside Robert Redford. Cat Ballou in particular became a breakout. Her role as a schoolteacher turned outlaw earned her an Oscar nomination, and her performance captured a rare combination of charm and strength. Hollywood had found its new leading lady. Then came the film that would define an era, and forever etch her into pop culture history. In 1968, Jane starred in Barbarella, directed by her then-husband, French filmmaker Roger Vadim. The film was wild, colorful, and unapologetically sensual, a space-age fantasy that reflected the free-spirited chaos of the late 1960s. The image of Jane Fonda as Barbarella, floating through space in futuristic costumes, became one of the most iconic visuals of the decade. She was celebrated as a symbol of beauty, liberation, and confidence. But privately, Jane struggled with that image. While the world saw glamour, she saw something else, a mask. She felt disconnected from the sex symbol Hollywood had turned her into. The role made her famous, yes, but it also trapped her in a version of herself she didn't fully recognize. She later admitted that, during those years, she often felt like she was performing not just for cameras, but for everyone: a perfect woman, a perfect wife, a perfect star. But inside, she was still searching for authenticity. Her years in France with Roger Vadim exposed her to a different world, one of art, politics, and revolution. She began reading about the civil rights movement, feminism, and anti-war activism. The world was changing, and so was she. Jane Fonda's eyes were opening, to injustice, to inequality, and to her own role as a woman in a male-dominated industry. By the time she returned to the United States in the early 1970s, she was no longer just a movie star. She was becoming something far more dangerous: a woman with a voice. In 1971, Jane starred in Clute, playing Bree Daniels, a call girl caught in a web of mystery and vulnerability. It was a role that terrified her, complex, emotional, raw. But it was also a role that demanded the truth. And Jane delivered. Her performance in Clute was electrifying, a masterclass in emotional control and courage. It won her the Academy Award for Best Actress, and suddenly, Jane Fonda was no longer just a glamorous star, she was one of the most respected actresses in the world. But Clute also marked another turning point. It wasn't just about acting anymore. It was about self-discovery. It was about reclaiming her identity, on screen and off. With Clute, Jane had found her power. But she also found her purpose. The confidence she gained through her work began to spill into her personal life. She started speaking out more, about politics, about women's rights, about the world around her. And while Hollywood embraced her as a talent, not everyone was ready for the kind of change she represented. Because Jane Fonda wasn't just going to be an actress anymore. She was about to become a voice of rebellion, a lightning rod in one of the most divided moments in American history. By the early 1970s, Jane Fonda was one of the most famous women in the world. Two-time Oscar nominee. International beauty icon. Box office powerhouse. But Jane had begun to feel a different calling, one that went beyond the screen, beyond fame, beyond herself. She looked around at the America she lived in, torn apart by the Vietnam War, shaken by protests, struggling with inequality, and she could no longer stay silent. She later said, "I realized that being famous gave me a platform, and if I didn't use it for something meaningful, then what was the point of having it?" That belief would change her life and cost her dearly. It started quietly, conversations with activists, reading banned reports, meeting soldiers who had returned from Vietnam disillusioned and broken. Jane listened. She questioned. And what she heard made her furious. The stories of innocent lives lost, of soldiers dying for a cause they didn't understand, they ignited something deep inside her. She began speaking publicly against the war, appearing at rallies, lending her fame to anti-war movements. At first, the reaction was mixed: admiration from the youth, concern from Hollywood executives, and outrage from conservatives. But Jane wasn't afraid. She had found a cause that gave her voice power. Then came 1972. Jane Fonda made a decision that would define and haunt her forever. In July of that year, she traveled to North Vietnam to witness firsthand the effects of American bombing campaigns. Her goal, she said, was to see the war from another perspective, to humanize the so-called enemy. But during the trip, she was photographed sitting on a North Vietnamese anti-aircraft gun, the same type used to shoot down American planes. The image exploded across the United States. Almost overnight, Jane Fonda went from beloved actress to one of the most hated figures in America. She was branded a traitor. Protesters burned her in effigy. Veterans cursed her name. She received death threats. Television stations refused to air her movies. The nickname Hanoi Jane became a scar that would follow her for decades. Jane later called that photo a terrible mistake. She said she was exhausted, manipulated by propaganda, and unaware that the photograph was being staged. But the damage was done. For many Americans, especially veterans, the image felt like betrayal. For others, it became a symbol of courage, a woman daring to question authority when few would. Jane herself carried that wound for years. She spent decades apologizing to veterans, meeting with them privately, expressing her regret. But she never apologized for opposing the war itself. That, she said, was the right thing to do, and she would do it again. Even under fire, Jane refused to back down. She doubled down on activism, speaking for Native American rights, women's rights, and civil liberties. She co-founded the Indochina Peace Campaign, working to end the war and bring U.S. troops home. She traveled the country, speaking in town halls and college campuses, often facing angry crowds. People booed her, spat at her, called her names. But she kept going. She once said, "Courage is fear that has said its prayers." And Jane Fonda's courage was born from conviction. Even as the controversy raged, she returned to acting, using her work as another form of expression. In 1978, she starred in Coming Home, opposite Jon Voight and Bruce Dern. The film told the story of soldiers returning from Vietnam, and the emotional toll the war had taken on them and their families. It was deeply personal for Jane, a way to bridge her activism and her art, to offer empathy to veterans who had suffered. The film was a critical and commercial triumph. Jane Fonda won her second Academy Award for Best Actress. When she accepted the award, she didn't gloat. She didn't smile triumphantly. She simply said, "There are many people who deserve this more than I do. But I hope that this film can be part of the healing." It was one of the most graceful moments of her career. The Vietnam era had changed her, burned away her innocence, stripped her of Hollywood's superficiality, and forced her to confront who she really was. She emerged not as the glamorous movie star of the 60s, but as a woman with scars, emotional, political, and personal. But those scars made her stronger. They gave her voice weight. They gave her life purpose. And though she would spend the next several decades repairing her public image, she never stopped being outspoken. Never stopped learning. Never stopped evolving. The fire that had nearly destroyed her was the same fire that made her unforgettable. She had survived the fury of politics. Now, she was about to conquer the world again, this time, in a way no one could have predicted. After the storms of war and controversy, Jane Fonda could have disappeared. She could have retreated into silence, into comfort, into a quiet life away from public eyes. But that's not who Jane Fonda is. If history has shown us anything, it's that this woman does not stay down for long. She rebuilds. She reinvents. She rises. And in the 1980s, Jane Fonda did something no one expected: she changed the world again. This time, not through politics or film, but through movement, through the power of the human body. By the late 1970s, Jane was in her early 40s, an age when most actresses in Hollywood were told their best years were behind them. Roles were scarce, expectations were low. But Jane refused to fade. She wanted a new challenge, something meaningful, something empowering. At the same time, she was going through personal transformation. She had married political activist Tom Hayden, with whom she shared a deep commitment to social justice. They had a son together, Troy Garrity, and Jane was determined to balance motherhood with purpose. She began exercising regularly, partly to manage stress, partly to feel stronger in her own body. And it worked. She felt powerful, alive, rejuvenated. She thought, maybe other women need this, too. That simple realization sparked an idea that would become a cultural phenomenon. In 1982, Jane released the Jane Fonda workout, a home exercise video unlike anything the world had seen. At a time when gyms were still male-dominated spaces, Jane brought fitness into people's living rooms, especially women's living rooms. She wasn't just teaching aerobics. She was teaching confidence, consistency, and self-worth. Her voice was calm but encouraging. Her movements were powerful yet graceful. She spoke directly to women who had spent years being told what they couldn't do, and she told them they could. The video became a phenomenon. It sold millions of copies, topping charts year after year. It didn't just launch a fitness craze, it created an entirely new industry. Suddenly, women all over the world were stretching, jumping, and sweating with Jane Fonda. She wasn't just helping people lose weight. She was helping them gain something far more important, belief in themselves. The success of the workout videos stunned even Jane herself. Overnight, she became a fitness icon, a symbol of empowerment for a new generation. But this wasn't about vanity or perfection. For Jane, it was about liberation. She had spent much of her life trapped by expectations, her father's approval, Hollywood standards, the public's judgment. Now, she was breaking free. In interviews, she often said, "The workout gave me back my strength, not just physically, but emotionally." Women saw her not as an untouchable movie star, but as one of them, a woman trying, struggling, fighting to feel good in her own skin. And that's what made her so powerful. Behind every exercise routine, Jane carried a deeper message, that health and strength were not just physical, but political. She encouraged women to take ownership of their bodies, to see fitness as empowerment, not as pressure. She was decades ahead of her time, advocating for body positivity, mental well-being, and self-love long before those ideas became mainstream. And she used the profits from her fitness empire to fund her activism. Millions of dollars went into the Campaign for Economic Democracy, an organization she and Tom Hayden founded to promote social justice and environmental awareness. Every stretch, every push-up, every movement, it was all connected to something bigger. Even while she revolutionized fitness, Jane didn't abandon acting. She starred in 9 to 5, 1980, a feminist comedy that became an instant classic. Alongside Lily Tomlin and Dolly Parton, Jane helped tell the story of three women standing up to workplace sexism, a theme that remains timeless. The film was both funny and radical, proving once again that entertainment could inspire change. She followed it with On Golden Pond, 1981, acting alongside her father, Henry Fonda, in what would become one of the most emotional roles of her life. For Jane, this film wasn't just another job, it was a chance to heal a lifetime of distance. In one powerful scene, her character tries to express love and forgiveness to her father's character, a moment that mirrored their real relationship. After filming, Jane later said that it was the closest she ever came to truly reconciling with her father before his death. It was art as therapy, art as truth, art as closure. By the mid-1980s, Jane Fonda was no longer just an actress, activist, or fitness instructor. She was a cultural force, an example of what it meant to evolve. She had been a symbol of rebellion, then of redemption, then of reinvention. And she wasn't finished yet. Every reinvention of Jane Fonda revealed something new, not just about her, but about what it means to be human. She had gone from Hollywood glamour to political activism to physical empowerment. And yet, through it all, she had remained true to one thing, her willingness to face herself. Her life was no longer about pleasing others, it was about purpose, peace, and authenticity. Music softens, piano turns contemplative, signaling transition. She had built herself back up, strong, centered, unstoppable. But life, as always, had more lessons waiting. Because even when you find your power, the heart still remembers its pain. Behind the success, behind the bright lights and applause, there was always another Jane. The one who didn't appear in the magazines. The one who stared at herself in the mirror, searching for peace she could never quite hold on to. Because even for someone as strong as Jane Fonda, even for someone who inspired millions, the hardest battles were the ones fought quietly, in the heart. From childhood to adulthood, Jane Fonda had carried an invisible weight, the constant need to prove herself worthy. Her father's distance, her mother's death, the public's judgment, all of it shaped her sense of self. She became a perfectionist, always pushing harder, always demanding more. Even as the world celebrated her, Jane struggled to celebrate herself. She once said, "I spent so much of my life trying to be what I thought others wanted me to be. But the person I needed to be was me, and I didn't even know who that was." 4 years, she fought an inner war, between who she truly was and who she thought she had to be. Jane's romantic life was as complex as her public one. Her first marriage, to French filmmaker Roger Vadim, was a mix of art, allure, and chaos. He introduced her to the world of European cinema and the sexual revolution, but the marriage was turbulent, filled with infidelity and emotional distance. Her second marriage, to activist Tom Hayden, was built on shared ideals. They were partners not just in life, but in purpose. Together they protested, raised money for causes, and had a son, Troy Garrity, born in 1973. But activism can be all-consuming. And the emotional cracks between them widened with time. Jane later said that while they shared values, they often struggled to share vulnerability. Her third marriage, to media tycoon Ted Turner, was perhaps her most surprising. Ted, the larger-than-life founder of CNN, was loud, spontaneous, and endlessly charismatic. Jane once described him as a cowboy who could never stop riding. For nearly a decade, they loved passionately and clashed endlessly. Jane adored his energy but often felt overshadowed by his empire. When they eventually divorced in 2001, Jane described it not as failure, but as freedom. "Ted taught me how to live again," she said. "But he also taught me that I needed to live for myself." Through it all, she never spoke bitterly. Each relationship, she said, helped her learn who she was and who she wasn't. Fame can illuminate the world around you, but it can also expose every shadow inside you. For decades, Jane battled eating disorders, bulimia and body dysmorphia, struggles she kept secret for much of her career. The pressure to look perfect, to remain youthful, to live up to expectations had taken a toll on her health and her spirit. In her memoir, she revealed that her eating disorder began in adolescence and lasted nearly 30 years. "It wasn't about food," she said. "It was about control. When everything else felt chaotic, it was the one thing I could manage." When she finally sought help, she said it was like stepping into the sunlight after decades underground. Recovery didn't just heal her body, it healed her mind. She also struggled with self-doubt and depression, often questioning her worth beyond her fame and activism. But slowly, over the years, Jane Fonda learned to forgive herself. To make peace with her past. To look in the mirror, not as her father's daughter, or Hollywood star, or America's activist, but simply as Jane. In the 1990s, as the world changed and her marriages ended, Jane began looking inward. She read philosophy, practiced meditation, and explored her spiritual side. She said, "I spent my first half of life climbing the ladder of success, only to realize it was leaning against the wrong wall." She began to understand that her purpose wasn't about approval anymore, it was about authenticity. Jane Fonda emerged as a woman comfortable with her flaws, aware of her strength, and unafraid to be vulnerable. She found freedom in acceptance, acceptance of her past, her body, and her story. By the time she reached her 60s, Jane seemed reborn. Gone was the woman haunted by perfection. In her place stood someone serene, grounded, radiant in truth. She returned to acting not out of need, but joy, performing in films and television projects that celebrated aging, wisdom, and laughter. Her work in Grace and Frankie decades later would embody that evolution, two women finding friendship, humor, and purpose in the later years of life. For Jane, it wasn't just a role. It was her reality. She once said in an interview, "I'm proud of my wrinkles. They're evidence of a life well lived. I don't want to look perfect anymore. I just want to be real." And that authenticity, after all the noise, the battles, the fame, became her greatest strength. The woman who once struggled to forgive her parents finally learned compassion, not just for them, but for herself. Jane Fonda spent years in therapy, reflection, and self-work, piecing together the fragments of her past into something whole. She forgave her father for his distance, her mother for her pain, and herself for her mistakes. She learned that the most powerful kind of healing doesn't come from applause, it comes from honesty. She had fought wars, some public, some private, and through them all, she had found what she'd been searching for since childhood: peace. Not the peace of silence, but the peace of understanding. Not the peace of perfection, but the peace of truth. After years of activism and personal exploration, Jane Fonda made a remarkable return to Hollywood. She embraced roles that challenged her and reflected the depth of her life experiences. Films like Monster-in-Law and the critically acclaimed Grace and Frankie series showcased her comedic brilliance, emotional range, and her uncanny ability to connect with audiences across generations. But Fonda never left activism behind. Even in her later years, she remained outspoken on issues of climate change, women's rights, and social justice. Her Fire Drill Fridays protests became a symbol of her unwavering commitment to the planet, proving that age has never been a barrier to action. Jane showed the world that reinvention is possible at any stage of life, balancing a career resurgence with a fierce dedication to causes bigger than herself. Jane Fonda's journey is a testament to the power of reinvention. From a young Hollywood starlet to an Oscar-winning actress, from a vocal political activist to a fitness pioneer, she has continuously redefined herself while staying true to her values. Her legacy extends beyond the silver screen. It is felt in every studio, every protest, every workout video, and every young woman inspired to stand up, speak out, and transform her life. She teaches us that courage isn't just about facing the public or political arena, it's about facing oneself, embracing change, and daring to live authentically. Jane's story reminds us that life is not a straight path but a series of evolutions, and each chapter can be richer, bolder, and more impactful than the last. Today, we celebrate Jane Fonda, not just as an icon of Hollywood, but as a symbol of resilience, activism, and unapologetic authenticity. She has shown us that fame and influence can be wielded with purpose, compassion, and courage. Through triumphs and controversies alike, she remains a figure who challenges, inspires, and reminds us of the enduring power of reinvention. Jane Fonda's life is more than a story, it is a legacy. And in every role she plays, every cause she champions, she continues to leave an indelible mark on the world. From the silver screen to the streets of protest, from Hollywood glamour to heartfelt honesty, Jane Fonda's journey is a celebration of a life fully lived, and a beacon for generations to come.